The thinking around the Library of Alexandria is maybe explained by looking at all kinds of different layers of things that we were investigating at the time. It also has maybe a slightly longer history because of our involvement early 80s with Egypt, traveling in Egypt, making sure to understand what kind of country this was. It has a certain type of attraction. The basic history of Egypt is, of course, something that never leaves your mind if you read about it once in your life and you keep going back to whatever the country has offered the world. The concept is, of course, based on the past, but at the same time on the present, and to a large extent for the next generations into the future. So it was the first time at Snøhetta that we actually used this terminology of past, present, and future in a certain setting of trying to create a physical shape to this sort of element of past, present, and future. And we used almost like the sun movement as a reference to time. You can imagine the sun coming up in the east, moving up towards zenith and going back down in the west, is the measure of a day. And that means something is popping out somewhere to be fully seen in the middle of the day and then disappearing again behind the horizon in the evening. So the concept was to create a tilt of something that could resemble the movement of the sun from below the horizon, above the horizon, and back down behind the horizon. Overall attitude was to find an oblique building that would be both below the horizon and above the horizon at the same time, whereas the cutting point where you go through into the ground or out of the ground is now. It's the ground you're standing on. It's where you perceive time now. Underground and above ground could either be past or future, depending on how you look at it. And that section, which we then generated, obviously created a tilted building that was referenced with the water pool surrounding it. And in the world, the most horizontal thing we have is the water. So it became a very clear reference system to the tilt of the section of the building in relationship to the horizontality of the water. In addition to that, it has a kind of circular shape. Actually, it's an elliptic cylinder, in fact. And there is always two circles in an elliptic cylinder, depending on the angle. So we calculated the elliptical cylinder based on these two cuts. One that creates a circle in this direction, and one that creates a circle in this direction. And if you tilt the elliptic cylinder, you get these two circles. One circle is the roof, and one circle is the floor, the basic footprint of the building. So these two angles create circles in themselves, but the surrounding walls are then a tilted cylinder. So it was a lot of geometry in the urban setting, the kind of joint that this position of the site creates in Alexandria as a joint between the inner and outer bay of Alexandria. Sort of everything twists around this point like a hinge, all the way out to the peninsula called Silsile, which was where the sort of former royals during the time of Alexander the Great used to have their villas, and not so far away from the inner harbor where the old buildings of the former library and the very ancient library used to be, where they took in everything that came in on books or manuscripts that came in, copied them, and then gave the copies back to the boats and kept the originals in the library. So in a way, it's trying to leverage all of these things. The stone walls capturing the building and protecting the building against the sandstorms from the south. The opening of the cut roof towards the north, controlling the microchip similar roof that actually lets the light in or not into the big space, which we see here. So all of these things started talking to each other at different levels. And these levels then became a type of physical form. So after a period, the project took on its own life, and we didn't have to do much. The project itself solved all the problems for us, sort of designed itself onwards. And I think being here today is kind of proving that we can't have been, the project itself cannot not have been that wrong. The effect of such a library on one hand is obviously related to the fact that one of the great libraries of the world historically was the Library of Alexandria. So when you recreate a legend like the Library of Alexandria, you're always afraid to take away everyone's imagination of what that library might have been. So in a way, it's the impact that it has as a building. On the other hand, it's the impact it has as an institution. And we've been very carefully trying to balance this issue. That's why we didn't come up with an interpretation of what a main library building might have looked like. It is a contemporary interpretation of a certain content that is looking more into the future of how this should operate. So it was connected to the university, or is connected to the University of Alexandria. So it is a mix of a research, public, university library. And today it's even more has a lot more functions even, like museum parts and exhibitions. But the effect has been, let's start globally, is that yes, Alexandria is back in a way. We're trying to promote through the UNESCO and other global institutions, trying to promote its position as a gateway to Africa. It's at the northernmost coast towards the Mediterranean in relationship to the rest of Europe. So it was very early described as a window to Africa, or a window to Egypt even, because most of Egypt is south of here. It's the delta where the Nile sort of comes out into the Mediterranean. And the global effect is that people travel here, not only to see the building, but also to get informed by the content of this building and involved with Alexandria historically, but also contemporary. It is a beautiful Mediterranean region with a much better climate than Cairo. So to some extent, this notion of visitors coming in and communicating with Egypt, with the rest of Africa, was very important. At the same time, locally, it was kind of a window from Egypt towards the world. So this window is transparent. It works both ways. And I think the locals feel, local Alexandrian inhabitants and the students, feel that they've contributed a bit by building this building with the content into an important institution in the world. I think they feel that they've contributed to how the world is going to develop and what it's going to do in the future. And I think part of the best proof was how well it was protected in 2011 during the Spring Revolution here, when people were holding hands around the building and protecting it from being attacked by hooligans or whoever might wish to harm it in any way. So now I think it belongs to the city very strongly. We just found out that it's on the new 10 Egyptian pound note, quite beautifully sitting there as a part of the decoration on the last probably pieces of money, which is great because we've designed the last pieces of money in Norway, and it's this kind of exchange of things. It has value. It's on the money, together with the pyramids. And that puts a certain leverage for the library into the overall context, both for the people locally, but also for the people globally that sort of meet up here. The library has hundreds of institutions that call themselves Friends of the Library of Alexandria. They keep collecting money, books, donations come in. So in a way, it really has influenced the way people are dealing with, let's say, intellectual property, intellectual content, and how they are trying in many ways to turn it into something extremely important. And I think they've managed. It's not enough to design a building. It has to be operated. And without these amazing directors that have been in a row here in Alex, I don't think the institution would have been the same. So the building is a platform. It's a stage for everything else to happen. It needs to be a great stage, but it's still only a stage. It's all operated by people, the initiatives they take, and how it operates within the local community, but also worldwide. Winning the competition of the Library of Alexandria affected my life, but also my wife's life, Jorunn, and the whole of Snøhetta, I would say. You know, it was the first kind of pillar of a project that was introduced in to the family, the constellation of Snøhetta, and first one that was interpreted as kind of an extraordinary piece of work. And I think a lot of people in the architectural world still see this as a major masterpiece in many ways, simply because it's reacting so contextually to the content, the big library space, and how it operates. But of course that catapulted a lot of self-confidence, you might say, which we misspent for many years after after we won the competition in Alexandria, but which led us in architectural theory to continue looking at the fifth facade as an issue, not only as a roof, but maybe as something you can walk on, like with the Opera House in Oslo. This whole issue of oblique architectures, you know, what does that mean? Gravity, relationship, building as a negotiator between different past, present, futures. These type of things were all triggered through the thinking with the library. And they maintained themselves and repeated themselves into new generations of objects, projects, concepts. And in my mind, if this one hadn't been successful though, we would have tested it again because it was simply too good to let it go. So I think, yes, it's been extremely important. It's the whole basis for, you know, why we succeeded. But it was extremely important to get more than the library in Alex, because being a one-hit wonder is absolutely no good for an architecture practice or design practice. So anyway, we had to move on. And moving on from here was, of course, not so easy because expectations were high. The results that were expected out there were expected to be of the same kind of power. And it takes time to adjust to these type of things. So on one hand, yes, it was great to have it. On the other hand, it was demanding. You're a little afraid of, you know, can I really do it again? Is it possible? Can we actually get there again? But we did, so I'm happy. Well, I think the library in Beijing, which is now under construction, and being here again, reminds me of how we were looking at collective space in a library. So, you know, the program of the Alexandria Library was initially a program where different spaces were allocated into different rooms. It was our decision to turn it into a large space library, and at the time, and still is, the largest library room in the world, with all these terraces. So yes, you have small areas where you can subtract specific volumetrics out of the space. You can move back in, you can find your own spot. And with the Beijing Library, we're doing something similar. This time it's a square building, slightly bigger library space than here, but at the same time with an internal landscape, which is also sort of terraced, but not more organically a terrace than here, and where the movement inside the main space is slightly different. But there is a clear relationship in filling up a large space with a certain topography of things. And this topography in Beijing is more organic, and here it's more organized in terraces. But they are cousins, you know. I mean, the effect of the Beijing libraries remains to be seen. But if we can take the experience we have from here, whatever political system you have, there is a demand from the public to get informed. And really we're talking to the user groups rather than to any type of political system in a country. So yes, I believe honestly that by providing institutions like these type of libraries, that you do reach a much larger public on certain items than if you didn't do it. So compared to the two that we have here and the experience from here and what is happening in Beijing, I do believe it could change. It's all about sensitizing the public, not about making the political elite happy. It's more about making people happy. And maybe you can achieve that by offering them something quite generous, accessible, and making sure that they can actually get down to this little beautiful book or sit on the computer in an environment where they can investigate themselves what their own lives should be about. What do I love the most about this building? Location probably. If it has a most magnificent setting here along the Corniche of Alexandria on a site which is facing the peninsula Silsileh, and it has the two bays on either side of it. It's located in the middle of an extremely important sort of location in the city. It's, again, not only in section but also in plan, it's mitigating certain situations. And I love the location. I love looking straight north and straight south. I love the desert on one side with the Nile, and I love the big Mediterranean on the other side. It's just an incredible location where you look north to look into the sea, Actually, I personally, when we talk about favorite spots in buildings, I tend to love being in many places in our buildings. Like I said earlier, maybe not so emotional, but there are some beautiful areas all the way down in the maps department, just under the roof, where you can almost touch the roof there, right? It's so low. So you're getting down to a point where everything sort of comes together. The roof meets a low wall, meets the floor, and that's where you have the flat maps. That's where the maps open up. And we always wanted the Department of Maps to be at the lowest possible point, simply because there are big, big horizontal drawings in big drawers that you can take out. So everything is sort of squeezed down in tiny layers. It's a beautiful spot. No, but maybe important is that it took quite a long time. The time span that we keep talking about when it comes to the construction of buildings, here we were extremely young. I'm really happy it didn't have to happen in 3 years or 4 years. So spread over time, you grow with the project, with all the parts, because here we had to reinvent so many things, spanning from the import regulations in Egypt on custom rates and stuff. We had to open new quarries. We had to supply new machinery into actually being able to produce it. The contracting issues were extremely complex. So in a way, this complexity of a fairly unified building is something you don't see afterwards, but it's something I carry myself when it comes to way of thinking social sustainability and the impact of large projects in societies, the process.